Welcome. Good to see everyone today. Thanks for joining us. We are, as we had said to Daniel, oh, we're so excited for what you're going to present today. And he was like, should you be? I don't know. This is going to be probably a very, deep discussion. We're going to hear a lot about kind of the state of our natural world and climate and its impacts. And so Daniel is going to go through the most recent IPCC report with us and give us the highlights, and we'll have a discussion from there. Just want to remind you, we meet monthly. Our next meeting will be May 16th at 1 p.m. Central Time. And topic TBD, we might just do a general check-in to see how things are going, or if any of you have topics that you would like to share. We are, open to hearing. We know that we're going to hear from Chris will come back and join us eventually and share, and Martin has some things to share. So if you have ideas of things you would like to present to this group to have a discussion about, we'd love to hear it. So yeah, okay. I'm going to pass it to Daniel, and again, Daniel kind of gave us a little overview before you all joined us, and there's a lot here. So Daniel, I will pass the mic, and thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
Absolutely. Welcome, Mary Ellen and Mary and Shimrit and Lenny and Murph. Good to have you all on the call. So I have the pleasure, I guess, of telling you about the latest IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change summary report. And as always, we want this to be interactive. So if you have questions during, just raise your hand. I do have about 7 or 8 slides to just kind of share some data and get on the same page, but then we'll also open it up to more facilitated discussion. So one of the things about this is that this is really a summary of the last 3 working group reports. So there's not new science in this, but it's synthesizing things together. Another kind of big picture zoom out here is that this is really kind of a last warning call, because the next IPCC report will be in 5 to 7 years from now. So we were just discussing before the call in preparation, like that's a really long feedback loop for people to be able to get information and then make decisions. They're continuing to do work and research in between here and now, but the just how long it takes to get these reports out, it's going to be 5 to 7 years before we have more updates, if you will, on the science and the impacts, and if there are new solutions that we've been studying. So there's 4 kind of main points that the synthesis report has. And some of this might be repetitious to some of you, so I apologize for that, but it's good to be reminded of it, because what I found myself as I was preparing for this is not necessarily new information, but the reminder that it's easy to get complacent with giant problems of like, oh, it's really serious, I got to act and there's urgency. And then I'm like, I've got to ignore or do things to like maintain my mental health and sanity. And so just being reminded of some of this stuff is helpful for me, even if it's hard. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you all. So we've already hit 1.1 degrees of warming since the pre-industrial revolution. So like the 1850 to 1900 range is what we're kind of basing this off of when we started burning fossil fuels in large scale and doing massive changes to our land use over the last 170 years or so. And we're already experiencing large scale losses and damages to humans, to infrastructure, to water and food security, to ecosystem health. And we also know that the vulnerable populations of the world and ecosystems are really taking the brunt of these negative impacts. The second main takeaway is that we've already, we are on track to hit this 1.5 degree threshold, which scientists have really said that is the critical threshold to avoid if we want to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Any incremental degree above that makes it worse and worse and worse. And any incremental degree below that makes it better. So every fraction of a degree counts when we're talking about this. So even if we're going to like kiss 1.5 and bend the curve with rapid action today, that's great. Let's do it. If we're going to hit like overshoot and go to 1.6, but then be able to bring it back down to 1.5 by the end of the century, that's great. Like as low as we can hold it, the better off we're going to be. So the The bad news is that we're falling well short of what's needed to achieve this 1.5 degree future. Every week that goes by, we have less of a window to hit that 1.5 degrees. We know that warming is unequivocally caused by humans. We've shown that time and time again with more and more accurate modeling. And if we just exist with the current policies, nobody changes anything, we're really going to actually triple what we've done so far, from 1.1 to basically 3.2 by the end of the century, which when you get into what does a 3.2 degree warmer world look like, it really gets dramatically different and chaos. It's not good. Systems collapse at that. Systems that we are used to collapse. So the good news is that we have all the technology we need. It exists today to hit the target for 2030 of 50% reduction. It really comes down to humans, people, political will. Can we as individuals, can we as institutions, can we as local, state, regional, countries level governments actually choose to implement the technologies we have, or to make some of the behavioral choices that we know will help? And so that's the hopeful thing. Like, we can still prevent it. We know that we can reduce climate change impacts or reduce emissions to reduce those impacts. And most of those solutions are now cheaper than ever. Solar and wind are down 85% from when they kind of first started. That's huge. And a lot of these solutions actually have a lot of co-benefits. So the question becomes, like, how soon can we get this stuff implemented? I have a couple slides to illustrate some of these impacts and ways to think about and experience how to make meaning of this climate change piece. So this is a busy slide. These are all directly from the IPCC report, so you can get them from there. These are the impacts of climate change related to the losses and damages. So if it has green lines across it, there's going to be positives and negatives impacts. But we're talking about water availability, crop production, animals and livestock, fisheries, all being impacted. On health and well-being, we're going to have more infectious diseases, more heat malnutrition and harm from wildfire. Think smoke inhalation, respiratory illness. Mental health is affected by climate change, displacement, the climate migrations, people moving from hot places or places where a natural disaster occurred, sea level rise. I think it's about 3 billion people are in this space where we're going to be very directly impacted. A third of the world's population is going to be very directly impacted by the worst impacts of climate change. If you live in a city or an urban area and you're inland, you're going to experience more flooding and associated damages from that, housing damages, infrastructure damages. If you're on the coast, not only will you have rainstorms and storm surges, you're going to have sea level rise that's going to impact your community. We're going to have damage to infrastructure and key economic sectors. I was just reading about Galveston, Texas, which over 100 years ago, I did not know this, suffered the worst natural disaster casualties that the US has ever experienced. 6,000 people died as a storm surge came through and basically flooded the town and killed almost everybody. So after that, they're like, well, we can abandon Galveston or we can build something. So they decided to build a 17-foot tall wall. I've never been there. Maybe some of you have, so I haven't seen this in person. And it was this great engineering feat. And after that, the engineers were like, we just built something that will protect Galveston forever, because they over-engineered it. And now they're risking 2 feet of sea level rise. The further away you are from the poles, the more sea level rise you're going to experience. So when you hear about global average sea level rise, that really is an average. There are some places that have experienced several inches of sea level rise, more than just a few. And so now they're looking at this 17-foot seawall and saying, it's not enough. It's not going to protect Galveston from storm surges. And we talk about, what does it cost to mitigate climate change? And everybody at organizational levels or even homes or governments, we don't have the money to invest in energy efficiency or renewable energies or mitigation strategies. But yet the estimate to fix this wall or to re-engineer this wall and build something to make it future-proof is $34 billion with a B dollars. This would be the single largest public works project in US history, $34 billion. And so this very small town that relatively has a small number of people compared to the population of the country is considering can they spend $34 billion to protect their city from the ocean that's rising due to melting ice caps? So that's just a very real story about lots of lessons there, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, or sorry, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's about, we can't really predict the future. The global ecosystems and planet is interconnected, that melting ice caps are impacting an island community in the Gulf of Mexico more so than coastal communities in Canada. So these are things that are going to be happening. And then there's a lot of impacts to biodiversity and ecosystems that unfortunately is not as funded. And so there hasn't been as much research on these to know what the complex interactions are of these systems. But we do know that we're in the 6th mass extinction and biodiversity loss. So that's losses and damages. And here's a good example of those climate disasters. So as we talk about how does this impact our economy, this is inflation adjusted natural disasters from 1980 to 2022. 2022 isn't fully calculated at the time that I pulled this graph. And these are the number of billion-dollar disaster events. And when you're talking about $1 billion or more disaster event, this is FEMA and the federal government and federal tax money funneling money to a one community or one region that's been impacted by a natural disaster, whether it's wildfires in California, hurricanes in Florida. It's a lot of money going to one community to respond and recover. And if you've ever been in one of those communities, it's a really great program, right? It helps you recover. And at what point do these billion-dollar disasters become so much that we can't handle it? We don't have the economic fortitude to figure out how to do this. It's just really telling that this is going to happen more and more. And we're either going to repair after the fact, or we can invest money now to mitigate and help bend this curve back down and get a more stable climate, or a climate that we're used to and that our civilizations have been built around. These are just some of the main ways that climate change will impact, and kind of the confidence level of how they're going to impact humans. So everything from droughts to fire weather increasing and compound flooding like sea level rise and storms, to increasing heavy precipitation, glacial retreat, global sea level rise, ocean acidification, and increase in hot extremes. A few weeks ago, my team was in Oklahoma City at a zoo and aquarium conference, and we ran a workshop where we asked people to look at their local space, their institution, their zoo, their aquarium, and what are the impacts that are going to affect you? Are you on the coast? Are you in the Midwest? Is it heat? Is it storms? Is it a sea level rise? And then are you prepared? And a lot of the folks in the room hadn't really done a systematic path of asking these questions. What are the impacts? What are the consequences to us, our organization? And then the fun part was, what are both mitigation solutions and what are ways that we can adapt as an organization? So just as an example, if you're a zoo, you rely on ticket sales of people coming through your door, and zoo attendance is very weather dependent. They have lower attendance on really cold days and really hot days and severe rain days, and they're closed when it's dangerous weather outside, right? And so asking, how are you going to mitigate for some of these things? And heat is maybe easier to mitigate for by creating shade and cooling stations, but severe storms and flooding is going to be harder to necessarily, like, you're not going to be able to stop that from happening, and you can't make people comfortable in downpours or tornadoes, right? So how is that going to impact their ability to operate? And a lot of these places, and this is no offense to them, most organizations, when they do strategic future planning, it's always this upward growth trend, right? We're going to have more visitors each year. We're going to grow in our revenues. We're going to increase our impact if you're whatever organization you work with or for. I don't know any organizational strategic plan that predicts a contraction in their organization. And then this last chart from the report is a really fascinating one to really get this generational perspective. And just to put this in a very personal context, my parents were born in 1948, so they're basically this lower line down here. They've had relatively stable climate for the majority of their life. Whoops, sorry. I was born in 1980, so I've had about half of my life so far relatively stable, and then it's been getting hotter and hotter the last 20 years of my life. And I have a child who was born in 2016, so not quite 2020, but still basically not that old. And what this chart shows is that from 1900 to 2020, these are actual observed temperatures, and the change above this 1850 to 1900 level. So this is the pre-industrial revolution baseline that we refer to with climate change numbers. And then going forward from 2020 are 5 different scenarios of possibility, one of which is very low. That requires dramatic action. And quite honestly, we probably aren't going to have this scenario play out. I hope we do, but probably not. Low is possible. This is where we overshoot 1.5, we hit 1.6, but then by the end of the century, we're starting to kind of bring it back down right at 2100. Intermediate is we keep going past 1.6 into 2100. High and very high, you can see that it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. We're not changing our ways, we're emitting more and more carbon. So then each of these bars for these different stages of life show those 5 different scenarios of possibility. So it's just interesting for me to think about, you know, my parents and even a lot of policymakers today are in their 60s and 70s. They've lived in a relatively stable climate. And I just heard someone today say, she hears from superiors and other people at her organization, oh, I'll be dead by then. Like, this is the attitude of some folks, not all, who are in this age bracket. And they're the ones who, in some regards, are making those decisions that prevent us from actually taking action to mitigate and bend the curve down. And then we have people who are kind of middle-aged, like myself, who have this, you know, half of our life in front of us that is going to look very different than anything we've seen before. And the question is, how different is it going to look for us? And what can we do to make it be as stable as possible? And then we have people who are like my children or Steph's child, and any young children that you may have in your life or grandchildren, who their entire life is going to look so much different than what we think of when we think back to our childhoods. So this makes it a little bit more real, I think, for folks to say, oh yeah, I have a brother-in-law I was talking with over the Easter holiday who is a climate denier. He's like, I don't really believe the science. They don't get it. They can't really predict this stuff. And I'm like, it was a very interesting, I try not to really waste my energy trying to convince people that the science shows this, because this is my job and I know this stuff. But I engaged him, and it was really interesting to hear him pull out these kind of ridiculous, in my judgment, ridiculous statements that weren't based in fact. And one of the ways that I think maybe cracked in his shell a little bit is, I'm like, do you believe in physics? Do you fly in planes, right? The forces of physics are what we're using when we're talking about global temperatures. Hot air holds more moisture, therefore your storms can be more intense. What happens when things get hot? They typically expand, atoms expand, right? So that's why there might be more earthquakes. That's part of what sea level rise. It's not just the melting water, but warm water takes up more physical space. I don't know if it got through to him or not, but it was just interesting because he's about 10 years older than me, and he has kids that are in their 20s, like early 20s. And I'm just thinking, like, even if this is wrong, which it's not, like, these are the possibilities that we're fighting for every single day in the sustainability and climate space. And let's hope that we can bend this curve down, not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren, and for your children too, Sean. So it just is interesting. I'm sure you all have people in your life that you've interacted with that are like, I don't think it's even real, or maybe it's happening, but it's not caused by humans, and it's just some liberal plot to change the way we operate on the planet. Like, it's fascinating to me. Just a couple more slides and then we will open this up. So how do we cap warming at 1.5 degrees? This is what the science says. We need to reduce our emissions 50% by 2030, which we have all the technology to do that. We just need to make the decisions in our personal lives, organizational lives, and government. And then, the next milestone there is 60% by 2035. So one of the things the synthesis report did was start to put some milestones in 5-year increments, because this report is actually going to be used as a benchmark for countries who are going to say, okay, this is how much we've reduced. This is what our target needs to be. And is it lining up with what the science says? Now, we work with a lot of organizations, and we're trying to push them to reduce far more than 50% by 2030, because some people haven't even started, right? So if you have the means And the leadership to go further, faster, absolutely. No holds bar. Let's get there as fast as we can. And really with this goal of 90% reduction by 2050. And offsets, that's a whole nother topic of conversation. They can be helpful, but they should really only be used for about 10% of your emissions. But you can do some offsetting while you reduce. Marianne, we can share these slides too, so you don't have to worry about where they are on your photos. I do that too, snap photos of some slides. And this does update this new IPCC target of the 60% by 2035. And then there's just 4 more things that kind of in the synthesis report come together. One is just a re-emphasis that we need deep, rapid, and sustained mitigation and the acceleration of adaptation. So we have to walk and chew gum. We have to try to make climate change not as bad through mitigation, but while also responding to these disasters that are happening around us, if we want to avoid the worst projections of losses and damages. And the other piece here that I don't think it's enough bandwidth is there's so many co-benefits, right? When we reduce fossil fuel burning, we increase air quality and health outcomes for the people who live around these fossil fuel communities. Another big thing is a takeaway, kind of synthesis takeaway, is that the finance, technology, and international cooperation are critical enablers for accelerated climate action. In this area, and I don't have a finance background, but we have the money globally we have the technology and we have the money, but we have barriers to shifting those investments towards the clean economy. So while the global governments, the national governments have a role to play, we also need to recognize that we individuals and organizations and local action have a big impact as well. I didn't put that one on here, but in the synthesis report, it's something like 40 to 50% of emissions can be mitigated, reduced by individual and organizational behavior change. It doesn't have to be giant policy, from consuming less meat, which some people get triggered by because now the government's trying to tell me how I can eat, right? This was one of the things my brother-in-law talked to me about. Traveling in lower emissions modes, walk, bike, ride public transit, electric vehicles when that electricity comes from a cleaner source, reducing our consumption, which also feels to some people like a personal attack. Don't consume as much, make things last, wear it out, use it up, fix it. There's that famous little thing that I see in people's houses: make it last, wear it out, use it up, make do, or do without. But that's also a human choice piece. And I was trying to think if there was one more kind of, just making your buildings more energy efficient, right? Kathy and I work with the Minneapolis airport, and they're doing a lot to make their operations more energy efficient and reduce their emissions. And you can do that in your own home with the Inflation Reduction Act. If you're in the US, there's tax credits and rebates available to make your own life more energy efficient. And then another big theme here, and this is not news, but we really need to prioritize the equity, the climate justice, the social justice, inclusion, and a just transition, because those who are being impacted the most have contributed the least to the causes of climate change. And it's really heartwarming for me to see this being called out so much throughout this IPCC report. And climate justice is now a much more regular topic in our conversations, even with organizations that we work with, whereas 6-7 years ago, you didn't talk about climate justice. We knew it and we snuck it in so that the strategies helped, but it wasn't a front and center thing. And thank goodness we can now talk about that. And then just another reminder, right? This mitigation and adaptation, these actions have more synergies than they have trade-offs. And so often in these arguments with people, it's about, what am I losing? What am I giving up? And they don't focus on the cleaner air, the cleaner water, the healthier environment, the less risk of viruses being spread, pandemics. So that's what I have for context. And I think, Kathy, were you going to take the question section here? Who am I turning it over to? Or Marianne?
I'd be glad to, or Marianne, do you want to take it?
I'll ask one, and just as a kind of entree into this wonderful discussion. But I also want to say thank you, Daniel. Thank you. But it kind of speaks to my question: how are people feeling right now? Are there ahas, surprises, or just plain out feelings? Let's just go there for a minute. Anybody want to jump in?
Same as I have done for about 30 years.
Can you say that again, Murph? I'm sorry. I
Sorry.
didn't quite hear.
About same as I have for about 30 years.
And how's that? Say, I mean, tell us more.
Well, just let me hold on before I swear. Frustrated,
Okay.
perplexed. I thought I was just stupid, and then I realized, Jesus Christ, am I the only sane person in the world? Well, I met you lot, of course.
Thanks, Murph, for going first. Who else?
I think for me, it's always overwhelm. Just like overwhelm, and it's always that sense of helplessness, right?
Mm.
Like with the scale so big and feeling like the power is in the hands of the people making the decisions and making the wrong ones. It's always that feeling of how do you maintain hope?
Thank you, Simrit. Thank you. Mary, you have your microphone off.
Yeah, well, of course, part of what I'm feeling is just this age-old frustration that it is so obvious and yet so obscure to so many. And a sense of hopefulness, I think in part with Daniel's number of percentage of the extent to which individuals and organizations who set their minds to it can begin to shift the line, flatten it a bit. And I think too, there's that hopefulness that as we see the positive effects, that it will have a, I'm an eternal optimist, but a tipping effect, and that it'll rapidly then begin to increase awareness and initiatives that will make forever more difference.
So threading on that hopeful piece, Mary, I forgot to say that. So while we are at the highest emissions per year as we've ever been, the rate of emission increase has slowed down, right? We were increasing emissions, I don't have the percentage memorized, much more rapidly each year between 2000 and 2010. But when you look at the decade between 2010 and 2020, our rate of increase has slowed down because individual organizations and even some governments are taking action. So we've already started to slow down the increase in carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. So that gives me a ton of hope. And I think, so something else that gives me a lot of hope is we are at the beginning of this wave of action. More and more people are calling Verdis and saying, oh, shoot, we need to do something. And I'm like, well, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is let's do it today. Let's get started, right? And we're seeing this trend across industries. So I believe the wave is going to start crashing and act like in a good way. It's going to move towards action. So a couple data points that may give you a little bit more hope.
And the thing that I would like to add is around what type of change. Yeah, it looks like that this requires a big structural change, and like we already saw in the chat, there are quite some barriers, some interest groups that blocking things, or political systems that are stuck. On the other hand, we also know that things will get moving by if you can go over a minimal viable edge, small changes. I remember also I've seen your tax updates in the US as an incentive for people to take action. So I'm really wondering whether the minimal viable edges, taking them is good enough, or whether we can do it with more. We probably need all of them, but I'm just wondering how to create movement.
Mm-hmm. Mary Ellen, you want to go?
No, I was just thinking resilience, but that's fine.
No, okay, cool. Amy, you have your microphone off.
I've just been listening and thinking. For me personally, since reading the report, I definitely had a few days of hopelessness, but I also, as Mary said, I'm an eternal optimist. So I think I just realized that I needed to maybe be a little bit more direct in my communications with people regarding this subject. So I think it sort of actually energized me in that we don't have a lot of time and really need to start taking action. So really just trying to look at what role I can play and what role I can play within my organization and within my community, and really just starting to push a lot harder.
Right. Go ahead, Martin.
So I always get this, the metaphor of, like, people swimming, goldfish in a goldfish bowl. And it's almost like, the goldfish is going really, really quickly. And then, oh, hold on, it's slowing down. But it's still in the bloody goldfish bowl. There's a book, actually, that was quite interesting. The Dawn of, what is it? The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. One of the guys has died recently, but they've come up with some good stuff. We've been here before. We've been in situations like this before, and we've turned away. So people have built cities that they didn't know about for ages because academic hierarchy wouldn't let them dig further and all this sort of thing. But they're coming out now that they're actually finding them. And it shows that actually humanity has been in a situation like this and got big civilizations and stuff like that. And gone, do you know what? This isn't working for us. And they've turned around and gone back in the jungle and gone back to being hunter-gatherers. I'm not saying that we should all disappear and go be hunter-gatherers, but we've been here before. We've got the ability to do it. It's happened in the past, ancient past. And we have the hardware to live in a more egalitarian, sustainable way. Just need to tap into it. Perhaps we need to stop asking permission, perhaps.
Others, yeah, Lenny.
Yep. So I've been following this work for a long time, and when I read the latest report, my first reaction was hopelessness. And that hopelessness stems from viewing climate change as and the way we're looking at climate change is putting a band-aid on the symptom. Right? The climate change is a result of numerous other ways that we live, the way that we talk, the way that we act towards each other, our separation from nature, and I believe all of the research and all of the work that I see being done towards this, it's still using the same language, the same methodologies, and the same approaches that got us into this, right? So this, the Einstein quote, you can't use the same methods that got you into this problem to get you out of it, and I think that there's not enough work being done there, and Murph, both you and Frank, I think, when you talk about crossing over those edges, right, there's some pretty big edges that we need to look at crossing that address root problems, right, and start changing the way we look at this, not as a, how does it affect me, but how are we all in this together, right? When we start looking at how we are and how we choose to be as human beings, and start looking at things like inequities, poverty, right? The things that drive capitalism, that drive power struggles, that drive the division of right and left. Right? Until we start addressing all these root causes, climate change, as much as it slowed down, it's just going to slow down, but it's still increasing. Right? The cancer that is still growing, even though that it's not growing as fast, is still killing us. And so I'm just throwing that out there, and I don't have a solution. That's just my feeling and observation that we may be looking at this problem from the wrong perspective. Thank you.
Nice. Other thoughts or connections people are making?
I was just thinking about the principle in living systems that systems cannot be steered or controlled, but attracted or nudged. And I was thinking about that, and then Kathy, a million years ago, you introduced me to the idea of the distribution of social innovation and working with our innovators and our early adopters. And it's like, what can we make so attractive about this that everybody is like, yeah, like I want that. Like there's a lot of things to be really afraid of here. And, you know, sort of harnessing the hope that a lot of you feel. So like, what is it that it's like working with the people who are here and want to be in it? And it's like, yeah, you know, so I think it's like, it's harnessing that hope in a way. That's just what's coming to mind, that like working with the willing, you know, and hope, well, I mean, not hoping, and using that to bring the majority along. I don't know if that's the fast solution, but it feels like there's been enough evidence in other, you know, kinds of change that that's worked before too.
Maybe it would be interesting to do just a little survey with folks on this call. What kinds of actions are you taking to add your, you know, stubborn ounces on the side of the future, so to speak? If you've ever run into that poem on stubborn ounces, you know, that you think that your few ounces really won't matter, but if you have this framework of but I'm going to show up and I'm going to add my stubborn ounces to the side of a livable future for the world, planet, species, all species. And so maybe it would be fun to just take a little bit of an inventory here about how each of you are showing up in taking action in some way, shape, or form, because it might give the rest of us some interesting ideas, but it also might expand the way we're thinking about how we contribute to the kind of deep change that Lenny was referring to that needs to happen, and Martin was referring to in the chat, and Sharit was referring to as well. So, so how about other folks? What kinds of things are you doing?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, Kathy. You know, just the little piece that I can do is, you know, I own a home, so it comes with a yard, and I realize, you know, the amount of water. I live in the Western Colorado, and so water becomes a big issue here. To me, when I heard that in Denver, 50% of water goes towards watering people's front lawns, I thought that was ridiculous. So I am slowly removing all of the grassy areas that require both water and mowing, and replacing them with wild plants, and basically rewilding my little section of America.
Fun.
Yay.
Great. So rewilding our front yards and backyards. How about some other folks? What are you doing?
Well, I continue to have arguments with my husband about that. he's getting there, but he still loves his manicured. Although we're getting there little by little. I'll just jump in and say the little thing that I'm doing and have really devoted myself to, it has been studying and writing about a term that I'm calling generative communication, which, and I hope to, you know, publish and continue to get more work around this out there, but it sort of redefines what communication is about, literally everything we think, say, and do, and its impact, but it calls for where did he go? I don't see Lenny on the screen now, but
He's down, yeah, he's got his picture on.
Okie doke. But it requires, in order to be able to practice generative communication, a new way of thinking and looking at the world in terms of this deeper transformation of perspective and where we as humans fit within this interconnected universe. So I'm really working hard on trying to get it in an interesting way, attract, to use Steph's language, interest in what that might look like.
Fun. On a personal level, I've created a thermal envelope, so really strong insulation in my house, because hot and cold Minnesota, if you don't have that figured out, then you're going to spend more natural gas. The other thing is I've shifted my investments to sustainable investment funds and funds that are technology or other kinds of funds that are really kind of investing in areas that will be a good need for the future. I've engaged in a conversation with people at the International Leadership Association on what kind of leadership do we need now, and trying to create these kinds of provocative conversations about what ideas do we need to let go of, because the way we're currently, the structures and processes and leadership and organizational design really are not serving where we need to go, and aren't really showing up as capable of moving to our conversations to a way where we can solve these really big global challenges. And so there's something that's embedded in the background, or the water of how we think about leadership and political representation and other kinds of things that really aren't serving us. So I ask that question a lot and engage in conversation wherever I might be. And then I'm volunteering to do things like there's a group called Open One Planet Educational Network. I'm on the board of that, and the Pachamama Alliance, which is doing really great climate change work based out of San Francisco on a global scale. And we're trying to figure out, what's the developmental model that can accelerate the shift from passion to action? For example, it's a thinking activity, but it will have strong applications. And then if we can figure that out, we can open source it and spread it to networks across the world if we want to do that, and which we do. But the point is that, we listen to this report and we think, what do I need to do to reduce my carbon footprint or other kinds of things? But there's so many things that are related, like organizational structures, hierarchies. I'm beginning to realize really don't seem to be very helpful in helping us solve these kinds of complex problems. So how do you provoke the conversation to move it to a different level? And we have a lot of ins in this group of people who are working with organizations or working in organizations that are experimenting with different ways of organizing and unleashing capacity and leadership. Dale is part of a network in Nebraska that's highly networked rather than hierarchical, and they're unleashing stuff all over the place there. So we're starting to see different models, and what we don't think is how that work helps us with climate change, but it does, because there's everything's connected. It's all intersectional. And so maybe that provokes some additional stuff for, how are you showing up in this time and space to, nudge the world or attract the world towards another direction? Thoughts?
I'm going to riff off of Shimrit just wrote a wonderful long chat, and I was reading, and the first one, just as my adult son, who I think saw the writing on the wall here a while back, and he's vegan, and I'm trying to, you're vegan? Okay, I'm going to cook vegan options, for you, but then that's going to help the rest of us. So that I'm also, in this retired stratus, whatever that means, but I'm just noticing, I have time to notice how many people in retired circles, okay, good, let's go. We're traveling, we're flying. And I was like, everybody's flying, and that is a big contributor. So we're talking in our house about, well, how can we reduce our carbon footprint and not hop on a plane, for every other thing? That's a big footprint, for example. The other thing I was struck with in Daniel's opening slide, or the second slide, in talking about the political will, and people use that a lot in the small p. I would love it if we could change that word to human will, because I think when people see political, they automatically defer to the political leaders and they don't own it individually. And if we could even just say humans will to, but I know that's the word it's often used. But kind of just thinking about it, and what does future me think about current me doing whatever, and really trying to tap into the motivational aspects to this. What helps people pay attention to any kind of change in their lives, and using some of that language for myself.
Very cool. The other question that I've been playing with to help redirect and focus my work from, I've been using this for the last couple of years, is how do I want to be remembered? What kind of legacy would you like to leave? How would you like to be known? And I'd like to be known by my nephews and nieces as a person who showed up around climate, for example, for them and for the quality of their future life. I'd like to be known as a good ancestor. So, where are, I was reading Esther Derby's book on positive change. And one of the things that she talks about there is that, in a system, you've got to figure out what thread do you want to pull, and if you want to pull over here, but there is no thread accessible, then you have to look around and say, okay, in this massive kind of interconnected world of things, where is the thread that you can pull to create a change in the system? And I think that's kind of a way of thinking. And I noticed that Sharit had put down a beautiful list of things that she's doing. But the studying about white supremacy and colonialism and those things are things that are on my radar too. And it's really one of the reasons why I like to learn from nature, is that nature isn't designed as humans have designed it. It's designed as nature designs it. And sometimes having a strong kind of alternative frame through which to see the world. So for me, it's nature. It helps me identify all of these man-made structures and processes that we've created that really don't match a regenerative system, which is what nature is designed to do. And so it's easier now for me to see what isn't contributing rather than what is contributing. And I have many years of being, kind of reading management and leadership books and learning how it's supposed to work. But now with the perspective of nature behind me, it's easier for me to let go of those things that no longer serve and seek the things that can. And then we all have a network. I remember listening to Václav Havel speak about the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic. And one of the things he said is that our conversations matter. And he believes that the whole Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic started with regular conversations between 12 people about topics that mattered. And that then each of those people in that conversation would take that conversation and share it with people they were connected to. So all 12 had different networks of relationships. So you might ask yourself, are you talking about things that matter in your conversations?
Yeah, I love where you're going, Kathy, with like our words matter and our thoughts matter, our paradigms and worldviews. And I also like some of the very direct actions that people talk about, because we still do need to make those actions. We need to eat vegan or vegetarian or less meat. We need to choose transportation options. It comes down to this human will of my individual decisions, because I could be, and this is something that famous people get criticized for. They're a giant mouthpiece for climate change, Leonardo DiCaprio, but then I don't know how many houses he has or private jets, or these things come up. So it is really important that as we're talking about it, that we walk the talk as much as possible, like making your home energy efficient. I think, Steph, you said your second vehicle is an e-bike. I like to shock people. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, not the most transit-friendly town in the country. And for a family of 5, we own 1 car because we chose very intentionally where to live, close to my children's schools. They're both walkable. I can walk, bike, or bus to my office. That's 3 miles away. And we have 1 car to make, and it's a Prius, so we can make our trips in a low carbon mode. And there have been times when I've been tempted, like, should I get a second car? It would make my life so much easier on some days. And then I come back to the commitment that I have to environmental action and lower emissions. And I also even, like, this goes to the co-benefits of cars are expensive. I have a higher quality of life right now for my family of 5 because I own 1 vehicle and I don't have to spend all that extra money on a second vehicle. So, like, remembering all those different ways, those, what was my last slide that said, gosh, I lost my slide deck. There are more synergies than there are trade-offs. I love that line. So look for those synergies in what you're doing, whether it's the conversations or the actions.
I think as well, when we talk about having the electric car, having the e-bike, having renewable energy, a lot of this is done off the back of slave labor. So how are we holding those companies to account for how they're making the Western world greener off the back of, again, the more vulnerable populations?
They're jockeying for position over Africa. They really are. China, the US and the UK, and Europe. I mean, you know, poor old Africa can support itself, but isn't allowed to. They're not allowing them to do, which is what they've been doing all around in colonial stuff. The IMF and the World Bank holds them to ransom. You have some funds. If you don't take the funds, we'll shoot you. You know, assassination. It's been going on for decades. Economic hitman.
Has anyone seen The Good Place? There was a moment, it's a TV show, it's a comedy, but it's about ethics and philosophy. But there's a moment where there's a realization that no one can lead a truly good life because of the systems that we're all caught up in. And you think you're leading a good life, and there's always someone suffering as a result of it. Which isn't to say you shouldn't still try and lead a good life. But that stuck with me.
There's an interesting, Tyson Younger Porter says something quite interesting where he was talking about not wanting to get too famous because capitalism would enwrap it, you know, someone would create a product out of it. Because capitalism doesn't want to solve a problem, it wants to make a business out of it, thereby perpetuating the business. So you're forever stuffed, aren't you? Yeah, in the goldfish bowl.
Things that I am thinking about a lot is how can I see waste better, more clearly? Because so when I go into organizations, because nature only uses the energy it needs to accomplish something, I always ask the question, okay, so what's the smallest thing we can do here instead of what's the largest amount of allocation of resources and time and energy to get what we want to have happen? And so I'm just thinking that there is, you know, how do we see waste in organizations? How do we see waste in our family systems? How do we see waste in our communities? How do we see waste in our own life? And then how do you work to eliminate waste? How do you live in a way that doesn't suck up more time, energy, resources than it actually needs to exist? And so that's one question that I'm kind of just enjoying sitting with and noticing. And I've been doing a lot of reading in resilience because I think resilience steps us closer to a clearer understanding of what regenerative looks like and regenerative systems. And that's also, it's these different ways of thinking that help you challenge the normal ways you think it's supposed to be that aren't really normal in a regenerative way. They're normal in a degenerative way. They always lead you to less vitality in the system. but we don't question them because we grew up side by side with those ideas. Daniel?
No, I just was noticing the time and want to be mindful of everybody's time. So as always, we love these conversations. They don't happen without you who show up. This is truly a community. So thank you for engaging this difficult topic today that can feel pretty heavy, and talking about both actions and sharing how you're feeling about it. I feel more hopeful after listening to you all. And I love the invitation that Steph had at the beginning. If any of you want to share something you're thinking about, something you've been researching and spending your whole life on, that's what this forum is for us to learn from one another. So just reach out to, currently it's Kathy, myself, Steph, Marianne has been helping out, and Chris. Like, if you have a topic, just let one of us know and let's get you on the schedule. But in the meantime, our next one, Steph, what was the date on that again?
May 16th, Tuesday, May 16th.
Thank you.
And then Martin's going to share this resilience scale that he's talking about in June on the 20th, which is the next one after that. So always great to hang out with you folks. Go ahead, Bud.
That's a great point, Kathy. So Shamrit, I'm looking at you because you have presented and you also talked about like kind of working through some blocks. If you want to give yourself a self-imposed deadline, and maybe Martin, you're doing this, like, hey, I'm wrestling with this resilience design, like, say you're going to present on it and you will give yourself a reason to focus and break through any blocks that you might have. These ideas that we share don't have to be fully cooked. You don't have to be an expert in them. They're here so that we can learn together. So bring one, bring all.
Come and play. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear that challenge and call out, and I will marinate it. I'll just think on it. That's a good, I'm looking for, yeah, I hear you.
Self-accountability.
Yeah.
Mary Fertig too, who was on earlier, maybe she wants to use one of these months to give a self-imposed deadline to move her what was it, generative communication topic forward.
Great. Okay, so we're kind of at the top of the hour. Anybody want to mention something for the good of the order before we slip away? Got a thank you from Lenny.
It was great. Thank you. It was nice meeting everybody.
Nice to meet you, Amy. Hope you come back. Always great to see you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well done, sir. Well
Yeah,
done.
well done.
Well done, Daniel.
Thanks.
Be well, friends.
Alrighty, take care, folks.